welcome to hour number 2 on a Monday with hashtag Daily K's host, Peter B. Tired of just scratching the surface of Korea? Want to get deep in the weeds?
We unpack everything about Korea through its history
On Now and Then
with David.
It's a Monday morning. Our Mondays wouldn't be complete without Mr. Tizard joining us in the studio to make us feel a little more intelligent via his amazing topics each week for Now and Then. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, very well. I get nervous when I have to read this script. It's the same thing every week, but I'm so scared of making mistakes with this wonderful script that you've written. So
it's only
I've done that part now.
One line, and the rest of your script is way better, way more in depth and difficult topics. But that's what gets you nervous.
That's the thing. So I've done that now. So now I can relax a bit.
Fantastic. How has your week been, David? We've seen some creeping up numbers, not creeping up, some skyrocketing numbers. I think today our producer updated us nearly at 6,000. So better than the 7,000s we saw, but still concerning.
Yeah, I've been a good boy. I've maintained my social distancing and sort of cancelled a few events that I was planning to go to. One thing I will say, I guess, that happened to me this week.
Yeah.
With my music group, we released our second single, one of the big platforms, Spotify and iTunes and all that kind of thing. And
Radical Gary.
What I found interesting about it, though, Pete, it was that it was a song about addiction. And it was a song about my own struggles with addiction through the years.
I didn't know.
And after I put it online, so many people sent me messages telling me about their struggles with addiction and what they were going through. And I thought it was fascinating that just by opening up and showing a little vulnerability, all of these people that I've known for so long, some people I know very well, some people I just know online, but they all sort of said to me, the struggles that they were going through.
Wow.
And I thought that was a wonderful insight into how sometimes people work, that we need to have some solidarity or companionship, or just by confessing ourselves, we get so many different responses from people.
Yeah, if you show your vulnerable side, I think humans, like, their reaction is maybe to show their vulnerable side and say, yeah, I feel you, I've been through this. Stacey Wiley, I think, read your post saying, we live with you, David. Sherry, loving your Argyle sweater, off the point. And I did see, I'm sorry I didn't get time to reply in proper, but when I read that, I didn't know that because, we've kind of known about each other for a while, but we've only worked together for a few months now, right? And I didn't know you had those issues. So when I read that, I thought, that's so amazing of him to put that out there. And the lyrics of the song I read, they were fantastic, I must say, as well.
Yeah, not quite suitable for radio.
No, but I thought very real and honest.
Yeah, I think it's important to be honest. But yeah, the people's reactions, I thought, was really eye-opening for me in that regard. So it made the whole purpose worthwhile, because social media can be very curated. We show filtered photos and all of these beautiful existences of the great things we do.
Of course.
To me, that was what happened this week, that I was really had my eyes opened to. I learnt something, I think.
Restore our faith in humanity. There are definitely lots of good people out there, David being one of them. Well, kind of a segue then onto today. Holy matrimony, after all, weddings may be most associated with this religion, perhaps, Christianity, which is maybe not associated with Korea from an outsider's point of view. But if you come here, you'll see so many churches and crosses in the nighttime, neon ones here and there, right?
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Christianity in South Korea. And there's a reason for that. And one of the big dramas recently, we've discussed it, I'm sure you've addressed it many times, is Hellbound.
Oh, yes, we've talked about it a lot.
Yeah, and that's where a religious group, if for any listeners that haven't seen it, where a religious group sort of leans on the fear and chaos in society to boost its own reputation and to grab power.
Yeah.
We also saw it in Squid Game. There was sort of this fanatical Christian character, not portrayed very positively in that. And so Christianity has become a bit of a talking point. One of the papers last week said that in part of K culture now, one of the tropes or one of the themes that we associate with K culture has become bashing Christianity. So it's become a little bit of a talking point, how Christianity is now portrayed in K culture, in Hallyu, in the what it does to the outside world.
Yeah, I'm very interested because I grew up going to church, firstly in the barracks in the UK, and my mum is more religious than my father was, and then I went to Korean church and stuff, and then I kind of didn't when I became an adult. I didn't have to go to Sunday school anymore, and I liked having my Sundays to play footy. And then I came to Korea, and I saw so many young people going to church. And they would ask me, the UK, Church of England, must be everyone going to church. And I was like, no young people I know go to church, in the UK, like zero.
Right.
And they were so surprised. And then I told my friends, I know so many people who go to church in Korea, and they were so surprised. It's just a surprising, I wonder where it came from, what the statistics are, if there's anything to back this up, or if this is just my anecdote.
No, I think your anecdote is real, because when I came to Korea, I think I might have told this story before, but I was expecting that I would sit up in the because I have a Christian background as well. Haven't been to church for quite a few years. But, I expected to come to Korea and perhaps sit up in the mountains with a man with a white beard and smoke a pipe and find my inner penguin or something.
That's the stereotype that you would imagine, right?
And I was completely wrong, because I came to Korea and there were churches everywhere. Even in the smallest town in South Korea, you will find a church. It dominates the landscape and the public psyche.
Sure.
In terms of statistics, there's a social consensus, like who the people of Korea are, that's done every 5 years. They didn't do it last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the kind of statistics that we have are from 2015. What they showed was that there's about 10 million Protestants in the country. There's a population of 50 million, so that's like 1 in 5. So if you were to get, according to the 2015 census, if you were to get 5 people in a room, South Koreans, one of them would be Protestant.
And that's the biggest religion?
That's the biggest. Buddhism comes next with just under 4 million, and then you come down to Catholicism and Catholics. But I think one of the really big differences is that they count people as Buddhist in South Korea. Like if you go to the temple once a year on Thanksgiving or Lunar New Year, you're counted as Buddhist.
Oh, really?
Whereas for Protestants, it's a lot more, let's say, I don't want to use the word evangelical, but it's a lot more dedicated. This will be once or twice a week going.
Sure.
So even though the numbers between Protestantism and Buddhism are quite similar, the actual day-to-day practices and performance of that religion, I think, are very, very different.
Yeah, it's not like there's a service to go to every week for Buddhism, right?
Well, there is actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have some Buddhists in our family as well as Christians, and it's exactly like a church, by the way.
Oh,
it's no different.
Do you go to the temple to do that then?
Well, some of the temples inside, like, they'll be on the 8th floor of a building in Yoido. So our family is based in Yoido.
Not like in a mountain temple or something like that.
You can go there, but they'll just do regular services, and it's played out exactly like a church
like
service.
Songs and things?
They do songs, and then they'll go and put their money in the box, and they have a cup of tea afterwards.
Wow. But for a regular Buddhist, compared to a regular like Christian, maybe you're not doing that as often, perhaps.
Right. There are those doing it regularly, but just going to the temple once a year, which a lot of people do for the ceremonies, that counts them. So I think there's a difference in sort of how they play it out. Of course, publicly, presidents have been very Christian throughout South Korea. So President Moon Jae-in has been on his visits to Europe, and he's been with big influential figures. You'll see him there on the screen. So it has an association with leadership, with modernization, with the sort of intellectual and urbanite people in South Korea, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's a little similar to the US in that respect, where a lot of their leaders will happily associate themselves with being Christian, perhaps.
There was a big, really interesting article last week in Hankyoreh, which looked at the 2 current frontrunners. We won't go into it because it's too political, but Yoon Suk-yeol and Lee Jae-myung, and how they were having to position themselves, whether a Korean president could declare themselves to be, let's say, non-religious, and how that would affect their possible political chances. So it still plays a very important role, if not in people's day-to-day lives, because now apparently the majority of people in South Korea have no religion, but it still plays a role in high-level politics and influential decisions, I think.
Yeah, coming out and speaking against those kind of groups can be like a death knell for your political career, right?
Yeah.
Now,
all about Korea.
Arirang Radio.
We're back with David in the studio talking about Christianity in Korea. We're going to get to the roots and the origins. Maybe surprised a few people by saying that Protestants make up the largest group of religious people in Korea. But as you said, the majority now is maybe non-religious.
Yeah, the majority is secular now. And I think that's a trend that you see most places around the world. As countries modernize, they do become more secular.
I think so. But like you said, there's still a big influence from the religious groups. And Tropic Girl K says, COVID has put a real dent on church going as well. I wonder how many people won't be going back to services once the pandemic is all over. Yeah, I mean, I think even at this stage, if you go to a small church, full disclosure, my cousin is a pastor, so he has a very small church in Suwon, and then they don't have to have restrictions. You have to wear your mask in church and stuff, but you can still have services every week.
I love that pronunciation, by the way, a pastor.
I don't
Not a pastor, he's a pastor.
He is whatever he got a moksandim in Korean.
Yeah,
yes, is what he is.
A lot of it's very hard for churches and for temples and things like that, because a lot of the time they rely on contributions, as I said, at the Buddhist temples. And when people are not going, then they're not contributing financially to keep these institutions alive. So I do think that Kay makes a really good point there, that they will struggle because online it's not quite the same.
No, and I will say I had a few talks with my cousin when it was in the strict lockdown, and even the smaller churches were affected. You know, he was really keen to get back online. I was like, well, the health kind of guidelines don't really point to that. And he's usually very reasonable, but he was quite anti those regulations for a little while because it's his own personal livelihood, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And just if you're a restaurant owner or whatever you might be, right?
Yeah.
Leon says, unfortunately, South Korea have a lot of cult groups due to Christianity, and Paul will have a lot to say about churches, how they contribute to the rise in COVID-19 cases. Yeah, in South Korea, there's a lot of these different aspects of Christianity. They're sometimes called saibi, which is like a pseudo-religion, and people might sort of sometimes approach you on the streets and things like that. I guess one thing that I would try to point out is that when Korea adopts Christianity, when Korea adopts Buddhism, when Korea adopts capitalism, when Korea adopts feminism, whatever it is, first and foremost, it's Korean. So it becomes a Korean form of Christianity. It becomes a Korean form of capitalism or Buddhism. And that's the driving force rather than the ism, I think.
I think so. Yeah, you're right. Colin says the first girl who got me going to church years ago was actually Korean. Her name was Jinshu, which is Korean for truth.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? And yeah, the Saibis, I think that's the backdrop in Hellbound. That's what we could call it, right? The cultish kind of religion there. And there have been many episodes in the past in Korea of certain cult churches amassing a lot of wealth through, some people would say, like con artist schemes and stuff. And other people would say, I just guess, through the fanaticism of their religion. But it causes an issue from time to time in the news, right?
It does. The dating is part of it. I've heard a lot about the kyoe oppa, the person that you meet at church that you might be interested in and things like that. Yeah, it's a big part of Korean society for good and for bad. And perhaps you can focus on the best of it. You can focus on the worst. A lot of the young students, the young adults I teach in their 20s in South Korean universities, quite a few of them are Christian, and they're some of the most polite, respectful and open-minded people you meet. So it's sometimes important to talk to people rather than talk about people.
I think as individuals, most people are reasonable and level-headed, right? Yeah. But how and when did Christianity get here? Because it's not something that started in Korea by any means.
No, it's not something that started in the West either, really, is it? I think that's the interesting thing about Christianity. We have all the paraphernalia, let's say, around us here, the symbols. But it comes into Korea through China, like most of the cultural influences. It comes during the Joseon dynasty, about 1600. There's a Jesuit Italian missionary in China by the name of Matteo Ricci, and he was spreading information about Christianity in Chinese, from Italian, or from Latin, I should say, to Chinese. And then Korean people that were visiting China, were visiting the emperor there on diplomatic missions and cultural exchanges. They would get hold of these books and they would bring them back to Korea. And there was this fascinating new idea, because remember, the Joseon dynasty was based on Confucianism. It was based on ancestor worship and the ideas of Confucius, that you would follow your father, your grandfather, sort of this patrilineal male line. And so the idea of Christianity was completely subversive to that. It was completely against that, because it tells you to follow God, even if your parents disagree.
So was there resistance from the early stages in Korea?
Well, first of all, it was just sort of a minor part of the culture. You know, it was kind of underground. And so many followers of early Christianity, which would have been Catholicism at the time, did so underground, and it didn't have a big effect on society. But we know that it became more powerful because in the mid-1700s, King Yongjo, he outlaws Catholicism. He makes it illegal to be a Christian.
Oh, wow.
And this is sort of, 250 years ago, so it's not that long ago.
Sure.
And then in 1866, which again is not that long in history, about 8,000 Catholics across the country are all executed. They're all killed.
8,000?
Yeah, well, that's in that one incident.
Goodness.
There were more than that carried out across the time. And so that caused a huge rupture in the society. Eventually, later, Pope John Paul II in 1984, he canonized many of them, made them martyrs.
Oh, wow.
But that was a really big point in in Korean history.
There is this thing that I drive past around a Hapjeong area, which I think is like a martyr site for Catholics, and I often wondered, who's that dedicated to? And I've heard some incidents like maybe more isolated, but 8,000 in one almost cult,
purge.
That is awful, isn't it?
And so what happened, because many of those, well, not many of them, but because there was a few of them were French missionaries.
Oh, here in Korea.
In Korea, the French were very angry about that, and so they demanded, it was only shortly after that Korea had to open up to the Western powers.
Oh, as a kind
Because
of
they say
punishment, at least.
Yeah, you're killing our people, so we're going to come over there, and ships were sent, and there was this threat of gunboat diplomacy. So Christianity then does find its way into Korea, and the early Christians, we've perhaps discussed it before, the missionaries, they're not allowed to openly practice their religion. So what they do, instead of building churches, instead of that, they build schools, they build hospitals, and they build newspapers. And they disseminate their ideas through those institutions to all members of society. Because remember, the Joseon dynasty was kind of very aristocratic.
Sure.
Women were predominantly kept inside in the angbang, in the inside rooms.
Sure.
And generally only the sort of noble, the yangbans, the people with the gats, were educated.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden this became a religion for everybody.
So I'm assuming, it would have become quite popular in that way for people who didn't benefit from the original Joseon system.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So it became very revolutionary, and it attracted a lot of people. It also attracted a lot of people because when Korea becomes colonized by the Japanese in 1910, many of the churches were against the colonization. So many of these churches that were established by American and British and French missionaries coming over with lots of Korean supports, they were against the colonization. They refused to practice the Shinto worship, which was the worship of the emperor.
They stood up against that kind of
They
thing.
stood up against that. Maybe it's not because of colonization, but because of theological beliefs. But because they did that, many South Koreans, or many Koreans, they looked at the churches and going, wow, they're standing up to the oppressors.
Sure.
They're standing up to the emperor. And if you remember at this time, Koreans would have felt very hopeless because America wasn't helping them.
Sure.
Right? They'd asked America to help them in 1919. Russia wasn't helping them. China wasn't helping them. They'd been colonized. They were losing their language. And so this created a situation where many Koreans then turned to God. They turned to religion. They turned to something for salvation.
Yeah, and not just like that kind of esoteric symbol, but the church is actually standing up and saying, we're not going to do this and this. So I didn't know this origin to it, but that might explain why there's still quite a few Koreans practicing these days. Because I don't know in Britain if there's some kind of comparable recent event to make people feel such patriotism through a religion, perhaps.
Well, I think war does it. If you look at the poetry that comes out of World War I and World War II, some of Churchill's speeches and things like that, they do talk about sort of this Christian nation and this community of people and things like that. So I think traumatic events do drive people towards religion. And we started this part by saying that most modern nations become more secular over time.
Sure.
That might be because our lives in some way don't have that existential threat hanging over them. We're not worried about life and death as much. Of course, we're worried about mental health and paying our rent and getting fat and all of these things. But the life and death isn't as strong. So maybe that's one of the reasons religion sort of creeps into the background a bit more.
Because it's a peaceful time. And maybe that's why, well, I'm pretty sure that's why the drama creators of Hellbound used that as a driver for people to turn more to that cultish kind of belief. We've got lots of messages from our listeners. This topic really stirring up interesting debate and just your personal experiences. Lynn from North Carolina saying, I grew up in the Catholic religion, but in my teens began questioning the doctrine. So I started looking at other religions and found that a non-Christian religion made more sense to me. Yeah, I think with all religions, as long as there's the freedom to kind of be curious and to choose and to just believe in what you believe in, that's the important part of them.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to do comparative religious studies and look at all the different things and what they say and what they profess. So yeah, I really support that idea. Cherie says that did not know these figures regarding the religions in Korea. Glad to learn something new today. You're more than welcome. If we learn one thing a day, that's great.
Absolutely.
Not contributing also goes on to say that not contributing financially in person hasn't been affecting churches in the States, because now you can still contribute online.
I did see them doing online services, and you had the option to kind of send money online, which I'm sure is great for convenience, but I think it just led people to maybe donate less because, you know, there's no... Talking about last week's subject, Nunchi boy.
Right? People are looking at you. Maybe I should try this in my university lectures and please donate.
Yeah, then everyone will feel obliged. Jackie Wong says, although born into a Buddhist family, I don't really follow the traditions, but I do still prefer the approach of it. But with any religion, some people get twisted in the teachings and can mislead others. You know, I think a lot of religions at their heart have some really good, nice moral messages, but they can get completely twisted.
Yeah, I think if you read the original ideas of them, there's a lot of goodness to be found. Tropic Girl Daily K says, people want different messages than just reading a Bible and hearing the same lessons over and over. They want life advice. Joel Osteen are doing better than the traditional churches because aspects of individualism, meditation, self-love, yoga, there's more to look for than just spiritual things, but there's health and well-being going in there. So I guess, yeah, some people like this, like Joel Osteen, are finding those paths.
Yeah, and that sounds very interesting with like the meditation and that kind of side of things as well. I guess grabbing people's attention from a religion is an important thing, right?
Well, the meditation is one thing because it's been associated with Buddhism. There are people that won't do meditation for that reasons. And why Christianity is sometimes an issue in South Korea. That kind of... I said about Confucianism and ancestor worship and bowing to your parents on certain days. Yeah. That's very difficult for some Christians who won't do that because it means worshipping their parents instead of worshipping God. So
if you're strict, right, you don't do that.
Just these actions have really big effects sometimes.
My cousin as well, I think that's part of the reason, because my grandmother was maybe the first Christian in the family after her husband, my grandfather, passed away really young. And then we never did chesa, you know, having the table and the ancestral rites. We're like, that's not right in this religion, but it's kind of counter to the traditions of the country. Sophie Sabah from Kota Kinabalu says the church near me is still closed for now as the cases of COVID are hovering at a certain level. Yeah, and I really am curious as to the listener's query. Will the numbers get the same as well after COVID? I wonder.
Everything will be different.
Yes.
From religion to life to everything. Nothing will change, except maybe the politics. Ing from Malaysia says, Christianity seems like a more fun religion compared to others, as there are Christian fellowships to sing songs, have fun together. And in Malaysia, very similar to Korea, people who go to temples once a year are also called Buddhists. Ing had an experience in South Korea where they were approached by a cult and it wasted their time while they were trying to eat lunch. And they said, do you want eternal bliss? And Ing replied by saying, suffering is part of life.
Oh, that's very wise, isn't it? Yeah. There are quite a few foreign Jehovah Witnesses I see on the streets as well, which I was really surprised by here in Korea as well.
You used to see more public proselytizing in Myeongdong Pyongyang in the subway. When I first arrived, there was a lot of it on the subway. What you'll see in the streets is young people normally working in twos, a boy and a girl, will come up and ask you, where is the bookstore? And I say, why don't you use your phone? And they say, I don't have a phone. And you say, are you crazy? You don't have a phone in South Korea in 2021. You must be. I'll leave you there.
The smartphone religion for sure. One thing that I'm sure many of our listeners might be curious about, me as well, when Korea was split into two then, North and South, was there a difference in Christianity? Like, did it spread in both places? Are there Christians and churches in the north?
All of the Christians came to the south because the split between North and South Korea is a split during the Cold War. So it's a split between, let's say, communism and democracy. Just before the split, Pyongyang was the Jerusalem of Korea. Pyongyang
really?
was where all the churches were. Pyongyang was where all the Christians were. And Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, he was from a Christian family.
Yes.
His father was a pastor.
Oh, really?
So,
wow. I did
they
not
came
know
from
that.
But obviously, communism is a religionless ideology because it's more focused on class. So that got rid of all of Christian elements in the north, and so people fled to the south.
All at once, that just disappeared.
Yeah, all at once. People were killed, and so it became the home of Christianity. The home of Korean Christianity switched from Pyongyang to South Korea in the 1948.
That's so interesting, isn't it? And so then Korea South being the hub of this, when do we see it like spread more and more into the mainstream?
Well, a lot of South Korea was ruled by, let's say, authoritarian and military people, but because they were anti-communist, that sided with sort of Christianity and American
just
beliefs.
By default, almost.
By default. Now, as well, Peter, you said that in the barracks, sort of growing up, all Korean men have to go to the military and serve. While they're in the military, a big part of that, there will always be a chaplain. There has been, since then. When South Korea was industrializing economically, there was always a chaplain or a pastor in the factories as well.
Oh,
so
really?
they were placed in these really important parts of society. And you imagine during this development, so many people were coming to the cities. It was going from an agricultural city to an urban one. They would come to the big city. They would have no friends, no social circle.
Sure.
And there would be a church organization in the factory, in the military, and it sort of gathered people together.
Oh, so it played a social role, just, people being lonely and human nature and whatnot, coming together through these things. Yeah. And they even had a role in the democracy movements to topple those
always there.
regimes?
They weren't the only part. There was also labor unions and journalists, but the Christians were part of sort of giving people freedom from the military rule, from the authoritarian things. That was very important. I can see that time's running out, so I'm just going to jump to the last part, which is in South Korea, there has been this push for an anti-discrimination law to sort of protect minorities. And this year in September, 32 different Christian organizations got together to try to support this movement. And this was interesting because it brought Catholics and Protestants together.
Wow.
And they said, Jesus loved those who were hated by others and seen as immoral sinners, minorities, or weak. We support the legislation of the anti-discrimination law as we are Christians. So you might not always see that message on Twitter or online on social media.
Yeah, because you see the other side, that there are some conservative Christian groups always against those anti-discrimination laws because they're a little discriminatory themselves.
And that exists, that does exist. But there is another side, and the more sort of complex and more nuanced you look at these, you see many different sides to many different stories.
Well, that's a nice point to finish up on because, I would say my cousin and some churches that I know in Korea, I don't go often even these days, they are reasonable people who fully support the rights of everyone. But you're right, on the news, maybe on social media more, you'll see the other side. The extreme right-wing side. Yeah. As ever, David, you've educated us, me in particular, so thank you. And we're going to see you again next Monday, right?
Absolutely.
You can listen to Monday's segment Now and Then with David Tizard every Monday from 10 a.m. KST on #DailyK.